I wouldn't say I'm only happy when it rains, but I definitely do love it when it rains. How about you? Of course, I started with that song title because that's definitely one of those recognizable tunes by this band and who we're going to talk about today on Waterproof Records. Thank you for joining me. I'm excited to do another episode for you, and we're going to get into it. So, I just, as I listen back to a lot of my episodes, I feel like sometimes I take a little bit too much time at the beginning, and I know you're anxious, I'm anxious. There's only so many moments left in our days. We're busy, we're running around. It's like, Jacob, get me to the freaking album. So I will do that for you right now. It's time to talk about Garbage, self-titled, so it's also garbage. Let's go.
Things are gonna change, I can feel it.
If this gonna be that kind of party, I'm gonna...
Waterproof Records. Waterproof Records. Waterproof Records with Jacob Gibbons.
Yes, that was quick. That was a quick intro. I think that's probably the fastest it's not the fastest I've ever gotten to it, because if you go back to the earliest episodes of the show, it's like I almost said nothing. I just literally say, like, it's time to talk about, say the band, then go. So if you want me to go back to that format, or if you like me just kind of dilly-dallying, then I'll dilly-dally all I can. I think some of you tune in for the dilly-dally, the dilly and the dally. But we're going to have to cover something very important before we get to the garbage, and that's the DistroKid, and that's the supporter of the show, my sponsor. Just has been with me for so long now, and I still love using their services, and I hope you're using them as well. And if you don't know, I do have a link in the description of this episode, which is 30% off your first year of using DistroKid, and that link is distrokid.com/VIP, because that's what you are. distrokid.com/VIP/waterproof. Jacob, remember to finish the link description before you start doing a tangent about how they're VIP. But you are VIP, I'm trying to tell you. But that is a service that you should be using to get 30% off. So, but it's time to get into the episode that I've been excited to tell you about, which is Garbage. Garbage. What a perfect interruption to the 90s where we were headed. Because this is 1995. This is right smack dab in the middle, and a very poignant time in my life, which I will get into in a little bit. But this record, this first debut, which comes to us August 15th, 1995, this is a time where Butch Vig, who is the drummer and, co-founder of this band, this is where he is getting kind of bogged down with a lot of the long process of putting together these incredible, iconic albums. Nirvana's Nevermind, Smashing Pumpkins' Gish. The list goes on and on. The guy has a huge list of albums that he produced, and he'd blown up because of the success of Nevermind. And now so many more bands were coming to him, and he was really getting to make a name for himself as a producer. But I, as a diehard Smashing Pumpkins fan, had watched Viewphoria, and I'd seen, it seemed like it was a lot of process in that recording with Butch Vig and Smashing Pumpkins, and so he probably was feeling a little bit beaten up and tired of these lengthy things and wanted to have a little bit more fun. And so Garbage and Butch Vig, and this all takes place in Madison, Wisconsin. That is the home base for this band and the home of Smart Studios, which is a recording studio that Butch Vig had started in the 1980s with his bandmate, also Steve Marker, and they had started this studio and had been getting success on that. So he decides he wants to start a band, and he's joining up with his Spooner mates, Duke Erickson and Steve Marker, and they're remixing songs. That's how this whole project begins. Is they're remixing other big bands, releases, and they're kind of playing around and experimenting and starting to explore samples and loops and beats and sound effects, and they're just having fun doing that. And then they realize they're like, we want to put a project together because they're writing stuff, but they're like, we need a female. We need a female who's going to lead the charge for this project. And I think it's Duke Erickson is watching 120 minutes, and he sees the video for Angelfish, this Scottish rock band. He sees on 120 Minutes this music video for this band Angelfish, and it's Shirley Manson up there, and she is the lead singer, and this song is called Suffocate Me. And he's watching, and he's like, yes. Because during this time in the 90s, a lot of the female vocalists, which we've already talked about, Alanis Morissette, and how, just epic, and her voice was so bold. And then a lot of the other rock female singers would scream and had this intensity. But there was this subtlety to Shirley Manson that you see in that Angelfish Suffocate Me video. She had a lower register voice. She kind of snuck her way vocally through songs. She has a great voice, but it perfectly combines with the music behind her because it's sneaky, right? It's like got this sensual vixen quality to it. It's got a creepiness, but it still also has a pop sensibility. So he sees this and he's like, yes, this is her. This is Shirley Manson. So I'm leading us to that point because I want to get to Shirley Manson. As a teenager in the 90s, I was like, oh, Shirley, you're so beautiful. I was just immediately taken with just her energy, her essence. The moment I saw the Vow video, the moment I heard that first song that was released, I was like, I'm in. And I think it had a lot to do with that shifting of guitars back and forth, the way it was like, it goes from each ear to each ear really fast, just the way it opens up. I remember that really, really catching me by surprise in the best way. And I was like, oh, I like this so much. And if you haven't seen my TikTok, my video that I made about reacting to Vow by Garbage for the first time, I think I tried to distill in that video exactly what that song made me feel. Because it is hard to verbalize it. There's a breakdown, an instrumental breakdown in it where it's this plucked guitar, this wah sound, and it becomes almost like an 80s nightclub. I don't know. Okay. There was a song in the 80s called Send Me an Angel. And you may know it. It was featured prominently in the movie Rad, which was about BMX bikers. Send me an angel. Send me an angel right now. I realized I could probably just play a clip of that song for you if I wanted to.
Send me an angel. Send me an angel right now.
But I liked that song a lot. But it has this kind of like 80s, you want to pound your fist, and then it gets into this very ethereal place. And there was something about Send Me an Angel that I felt like in the breakdown of Garbage's Vow, I had a similar feeling. Again, this is why I make the videos that I make, because sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to speak it to you. I know how to show you in my video that suddenly I'm wearing black and I'm wearing eyeliner and I'm suddenly wet for no reason, and everything seems kind of erotic and hot and creepy and gothy. And that's Vow. That's Vow. It made me feel there's a gothiness to, especially this first album. There's a lot of goth touches to it. So Vow is the first track that I hear. And Vow is the reason that Garbage really becomes this touring, ongoing band that's still going to this day. Because when they're coming together to bring this project together, they're thinking, this will just be a studio band. This will not be a touring band. We will have fun putting together things with samples, and it won't rely on drum, guitar, bass, vocals, live setup. We can explore. We can go in and out of different sounds and styles. And that was the plan. But once Vow goes and it blows up, becomes a hit song, I think overseas and here, and it gets MTV airplay. Well, they have to go film a video because it's getting popular. They have to go film a music video together because Vow is getting all this airplay, and they're like, oh, we're going to have to go on tour now. This is a real band. We're going to have to figure out a way that, Duke and Steve are going to be able to have samples and have their guitars and their bass and keys up on stage so that they can play some of these elements and make it that multi-layered thing that Garbage is. And it will grow even more into their sound. Version 2.0 really shows Garbage finding, this is the sound. Because his first album has so much more of those grunge, edgy rock things that are happening in the early 90s that Butch has been working on. Those are still elements. It's very guitar heavy. One of the reasons why I love it, I love it, but they learned to dial back the guitars to let Shirley stand out even more and let their unique elements of beats and sounds and things like that really, really separate them from their other contemporaries at the time. Garbage kind of finds this sound and this music that belongs to them solely, so that now you hear something and you're like, that's absolutely Garbage that I'm hearing. That's it. But let's go back to where they're coming together and those initial stages of Shirley Manson joining these three. She's gone on in interviews later to say, it was kind of a crazy thing to do, to come over to the United States just to meet three complete strangers and join a band, to have no money, no credit cards, there's no phone. She's just stuck here making zero money. And these guys are patient. She says they were slow moving at the time because, they're doing fine. They have production careers. They don't necessarily need anything to be a hit or for this to work. And so they can take their time. And here is Shirley Manson, this Scottish young female vocalist coming over to the United States to join this project, and just kind of like, fingers crossed. I think they started working on this album in 1994, and it wouldn't release until a year and a half later. It takes a long time for them to get this thing released in August of 1995. But she comes over, and they've said repeatedly in interviews and whatnot that first audition that she has with the band, it does not go well. She's said it. They've said it. They haven't really, if there's a more detailed book out there that explains why it didn't go well, but this is what I've gathered. I've gathered that audition didn't go well because if you don't know the person and you're coming into quote unquote audition, it's already an awkward thing. Those three guys have a history together. They don't know her at all. They're excited about bringing in a female vocalist. They had expectations in their head. She didn't know who Butch Vig was before she came over. She looked in the Nirvana Nevermind liner notes and she's like, oh shit, I got to make this work. So there's a lot of pressure going into this. And it's not like she's a session musician who can just come in and be like, oh, what are we doing? We doing covers? Do you want me to sing this? Do you want me to sing that? She's this singer from this band in Scotland. And I believe she even said over her, phone call that they said, do you write? And she's like, yes. And she just lied, because she was just like, I want the opportunity. So she had to figure things out. And so that initial meeting is going to be wrought with tension and what do we do? How do we know how to make this work? But the good news is they got along. They had a lot of similar music tastes. I believe they saw what was trying to be accomplished by the band. And there was a second. There was like let's try this again. And it was that second time that really clicked. And they were like, yes, we've got something special here. And they move forward. But at this point in time, they get to have all these freedoms. Butch and Steve and Duke are bringing in loops and samples and beats and things that they think are unique. And they're like, let's each show each other sounds and ideas. And they're experimenting in the studio. And sometimes they're just jamming on top of loops and different pieces of music that they like and explore. And that's how they're landing on these ideas. And Butch and the guys had written some of the lyrics for from the POV of a woman, and they had these lyrics, but as they're building the album together, they kind of turn over that responsibility to Shirley because she's able to really put her touch on it right from the perspective of a woman. But she was incredibly fair and balanced about, I liked where you were going with this. I'll take that concept and mess with it. But She really does add her touch to everything. And that's the thing about her that I think made it work so well. She was willing to work with these guys, but also stand her ground and be herself. And one of the things that really stands out to me about Shirley Manson when the first time I saw her is that hair. That I think I was just always into these like bright red hairdos in the 90s. Color in general. That was like a very hot thing for me. You know, if a female had like just bright color, vibrant hair colors, I was just like, wow. You know, I've talked about how I was crazy about Tori Amos, and her hair seemed kind of like fiery, bright red for some of her career in that time. I mean, it's changed sometimes over the years, and then Shirley was definitely somebody. And there was this element to her that was seductive, but dangerous. You know, that's probably the Scot in her. Very dangerous, kind of unhinged nature. And there were a lot of crazy things that were said about her at the time. You know, there were all sorts of rumors. And as we know now, a lot of that is undermining, and to take the power away from a strong female artist is to, you know, make something controversial or whatever. I'm sure you remember this, so I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off. But there was always the tales of Shirley Manson's into water sports. Right? That was always the rumor going around the 90s. Oh, water sports, which is golden showers, peeing on somebody for sexual, you know, gratification, or getting peed on or peeing on somebody. That was like a thing that she even puts it in a lyric on version 2.0. And, you know, the origins for that kind of thing are everything from, there's a Spin magazine, I believe it's Spin, and she's standing there with a band, and it's like a black and white photo, and she's just like standing over water, but there's like pee coming out of her skirt into the water that she's standing in. So just peeing in the photo. And I think people just extrapolated their own, you know, ideas and things that were about that. But then there was also a famous story about her taking a shit in an ex's cereal. I mean, just crazy, unhinged, you know, stuff like that you're like, wow, she's a wild woman. But that just draws you to her. I didn't want her to shit in my cereal or pee on me, but I'm just saying she was attractive and talented. Talent. That's what I'm saying, guys. But anyway, Garbage self-titled debut, released August 15, 1995. And it starts out with the song Super Vixen. And that's a great opening track. It's got those swirling guitars, the beats, the sudden stop. Her voice comes in perfectly. It goes into that quiet, dreamy, you know, verse, and then it kicks in. Great starter for the album, Super Vixen. And that's what you're looking at Shirley Manson as, this Super Vixen, right? I've got the track list right here. But number 2, this track on this album, this for me, you know, you hear Vow, and I'm like, all right, I'm in. And then this is, I think, the next song I would hear from this band. And forever will be one of the coolest pieces of music that they put out because it was so uniquely theirs. Queer.
The queerest of the queer.
What a song to release in 1995. You know, this is a time where queer, gay, trans, all of these things were not in the lexicon in everyday life. These were still things that people were figuring out. We were navigating our way through these waters of how do we talk about these things publicly. And Garbage drops this song, Queer, and it's got this skulking towards you sound. And it is fantastic. That is a song that I don't think I've ever gotten tired of hearing. It never is something that I turn away from, and I still to this day enjoy Queer. One of my favorite songs of Garbage of all time is Number One Crush, and that's not on this album, but it was recorded for this album. And the original version, which I just learned about recently, the original version, sorry to divert off of Garbage self-titled, but the original version of Number One Crush was recorded for this and was just more the sound that we know from this album. The guitars are distorted. There's not as much of the percussive beats. It's just like a Garbage song that would be on this album. It isn't until Nellie Hooper remixes it and puts it on the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack that thing goes to number one. And I love that song. And I love that version. I actually think the original version of Number One Crush is good, but I fell in love with the way I heard it first, which was the Nellie Hooper remix. But I just learned something recently that might blow your mind like it did mine. The Number One Crush version from Romeo and Juliet, that's the remix, those moans are not Shirley Manson. It's Madonna. What? Madonna is making the moan sounds in the remix version of Number One Crush that is on the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack. And it's not because she came into the studio and recorded her voice or anything, but Nellie Hooper had worked with Madonna and sampled from the song Bedtime Story. And that is where those, I can play them for you right here. So my whole life listening to that song, I always assumed that kind of the dangerous sexual energy that was being matched by already what Shirley's doing and the band is giving in that piece of music. But those little moans, I just assumed that was Shirley's voice. But I found out recently, Madonna. How about that? Now, if you're more well-versed in this than I am, I may be wrong that some of them are Shirley and maybe it's a mix. That's the thing with these remixes. You just never quite know how much a producer is going to pull, distort, mess with. You know, for all I know, he pulled from Madonna, pulled from actual breath or sounds that Shirley's making and weaves them together. But the thing that was the most fascinating to find out was that it wasn't Shirley alone. It was Madonna. To have her be on that piece of music is interesting. But back to self-titled Garbage album. Then we get to the third song, which I opened up this episode making a joke about. I'm not only happy when it rains, but I'm only happy when it rains. For me, this and Stupid Girl are probably the most recognized Garbage songs of all time. Queer too, but I'm only happy when it rains. Only Happy When It Rains and Stupid Girl were probably like the biggest radio hits, video hits. You know, if you're still somewhere to this day and a Garbage song comes on, it tends to be one of those, especially Stupid Girl. I think that is their most streamed song of all time. Only Happy When It Rains, great song. Fantastic song. Very catchy. This was, again, Butch writing against the grunge, downtrodden, depressing sensibilities of the time. Giving something poppy, something uplifting, you know, but also singing about enjoying the rain. Pour your misery down on me, you know? So it's like this uplifting song, but yet it still has so much of the ethos of the 90s. I do enjoy this song tremendously. Then you get to As Heaven Is Wide. Now that is gothic, nightclub, vampire, sultry. We're just like biting necks at this point. It feels hedonistic, sinful, lusty. If it's not in a vampire film, it absolutely should be. It probably is. I'm probably forgetting that some vampire film came along and used As Heaven Is Wide, because that's definitely that's the vampire goth club song on the album. So I will say, I'll be honest about one thing, which is some of the songs on this album to me a little bit got lost over time. As in, when I bought this album, it was summer of 1995, and, you know, Melancholy would release a few months later, which would completely take over my life. But by the way, Garbage toured with the Smashing Pumpkins for that tour. And they were on the first half of it. And then once the whole tragedy happened with Jonathan Melvoin and the overdose and Jimmy's out of the band and then they have to resume again, Garbage was on that tour. And I saw Garbage open for the Smashing Pumpkins in 1996. November of 96, I saw them open for the Pumpkins. And they were fantastic. The point I was trying to make is this album, I would listen to it and then it would kind of get set aside as I'm going into melancholy realms, and then it would come back. But there are specific memories that I have about listening to this album during that year of my life. I've talked about it before on the podcast. It was a difficult time. It was starting over in a new town in Wheaton, Illinois, and I really leaned hard on music and CDs during this time to let them kind of carry me through. And so I probably focused a lot more on, Queer and Vow and, As Heaven Is Wide and the main songs. If I put on the CD, you would go track 1, side 1 every time. You're going to get to Super Vixen. You're going to get to Queer. You're probably going to get to Only Happy When It Rains, although it's probably playing on the radio too much at that point in time. But you get into these other songs and you start to find like, oh, I don't think I spent as much time with it. So I get to Not My Idea, and I'm like, I played it, earlier this week, and I listened to it a couple times, and it starts out with a da 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 da, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a great song. This is a great song because it does that. It starts out with this kind of like heavy distorted guitar, and then it goes did 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 do. It gets to this like bubblegum fun, dancing around feel, and then it gets back into heavy again. So it's a very cool song. And when I was listening to it, I was like, wow, I'd forgotten how great this is. Then you get to Vow, which I talked a lot about. Then you get to Stupid Girl. Like I said, big hit. Apparently the hook of the was like them winding the tape back, and they sped it up a little bit, and that's where they get the hook. So that was some of the fun experimentation. And also the drum intro of Stupid Girl is almost exactly a replica of the Clash's Train in Vain. So the band admitted so much to being like, that's absolutely what we're doing here. They wrote in the credits on the album to members of the Clash to say thank you, because if you do hear Train in Vain by the Clash start out, and then you hear Stupid Girl, the very beginning, you hear the drums, you're like, oh, it's the exact same thing. So it's kind of funny because if one song is about to play on the radio, you're either going to be about to hear a Clash song or about to hear a Garbage song. There is another famous drummer on this album, on Queer, Clyde Stubblefield, who was the funky drummer who played with James Brown. He was a Madison, Wisconsin native, and he did the drums on Queer. I thought that was pretty cool. And then this is where we get to, at the end of the album, we get to Stupid Girl. And then this is where, when I was going through the album, I was kind of surprised. I was like, I don't remember these as much. Dog New Tricks. When I listened to that one, I was like, this isn't a song that I haven't revisited in a very, very long time. And it's not bad, because I think that this whole album is a great album. But that's one of those songs that you go like, it just didn't get into the regular rotation. Now, there's probably somebody listening to my show who's like, I'm a Dog New Tricks fanatic. That's the best Garbage song ever written. I don't know. Maybe. And if you are, I love you for it, because music is subjective and we're allowed to love the things we love. And the fact that Dog New Tricks didn't get to me like it got to you, that's okay. But then we keep going. My Lover's Box, great song. I remember that song very well. Fix Me Now, another catchy pop rock song. And then we close out the album with Milk, which is a beautiful song that Tricky does a remix for that enhances it in a very cinematic way. But this whole album, and this is where I wanted to get to, this whole album is what we needed in the 90s. We needed somebody to come in and say, the way we've been doing things, we're now going to do it differently. We're going to shake things up. And this album, this band inspired so many other artists to break from the norm. Don't feel you have to do this, whatever is selling these rock bands, these, grunge copy artists. We know at this time, Green Day is taking off. The Offspring is taking off. So we're shifting away from the rock of the early 90s. But Garbage was the exact wrench in the plan that we needed. We needed a female vocalist who had that Shirley Manson style. I remember listening to this album, and it always brings back a very specific memory, which I was in high school. I was living in Wheaton, and I was obviously not going through a good time. But one of my best friends in the world, Scott Guthrie, came and visited me for spring break in Chicago, and it helped me feel a little less alone. And the good news about that was later I would return back to my high school, which I know I've talked about here before, back in Tulsa. But he came and he visited me, and we spent that week. And I remember driving in the car with my brother, my older brother, bless him. And Scott and I were like, "Hey, Joel, will you buy us some vodka or some beer?" And I remember Garbage, this album was playing in the car while we were sitting in the back seat. And he was like, "No, no, I won't do that for you." And I've given him shit for it later. And he was like, "I'm sorry, I was such a holier than thou brother," because, we were church going kids, and he was driving around with his brother who was, I was 17 at the time. So I wasn't like a super young kid, and I was just asking my older brother to hook us up with some booze so me and my buddy, my hometown buddy who was visiting me, could get drunk with me or drink. And he said no. And he told me years later, he was like, "I regret being so, kind of pretentious or, religious, holier than thou, like I said, about buying you guys booze. I wish I would have just let it happen or helped you out and just let you have that thing and monitored it or supervised and let you have that moment," because he knew I was going through a hard time, but he was trying to be protective of me. And I told him, I don't blame him. It's a difficult position when he and I are only 2.5 years apart, and he knew I was struggling with a lot of depression. He knew I had been in counseling. He knew that I was on antidepressants. And so a lot of that factors in, right? It's your younger brother. And we're both Christian boys. He's going to Wheaton College, and he's thinking, here's my younger brother who's been going through depression. And my parents had really let me get away with a lot because I think they felt so guilty about picking me up out of my high school environment and bringing me this place that just would end up being one of the worst experiences at that school. I know I talk about it ad nauseum, so I'm sorry for you long-term listeners who have heard me go on and on about the horribleness of Wheaton North. Fuck that high school. And I just wanted to share that memory because I think that sometimes an album can bring back such a specific moment in time. Something so little as we're riding around, it's night. Garbage's first album is playing. And I'm asking my brother for booze for my friend. And he says no. And I'll always, when I hear Garbage's album, I think of that exact moment. That's a specific minute when you think about it, which is surreal. Because it's a specific moment in time, my junior year in high school during spring break. Nothing really stands out about it, but isn't that incredible about music? That it can take you back to a specific minute from your past. I don't know how many songs that I can close my eyes and think of an exact moment staring at something while the song played. That's magical. That's time travel is what that is to me. I just am fascinated by it. I feel like I moved through this episode like a steam train because, I knew I had to record it, get this put out as soon as possible. But really I'm slowing down to just for a minute here at the end to say that is remarkable. So next time you listen to a song from your youth or from the past, or even something that was just 5 years ago, take a minute to reflect on how it is taking you back to a specific moment in time, just from the sound. Movies can do that a little bit to me, a little bit, but nothing like a song. Nothing like a piece of music, classical music too. It can take me back to a minute, a second. Anyway, that's heavy. That's heavy when I spend too long thinking about it. Oh, there was one other cool thing that I found in my research on this one, which was the original title of Fix Me Now on this album. It was originally called Chris Cornell. Yep. In an interview, Shirley Manson confessed that she was pretty obsessed with Chris Cornell and had written that song with the title Chris Cornell. And there is a version with her singing his name in it that I don't think has been released, but they changed it to Fix Me Now. It'd be funny if it was just, in the same melody. Chris Cornell. That's it. That's Garbage self-titled album. That was a lot of fun. I feel like I'm just kind of reviewing back in my head, and this often happens on the ones where I'm sitting in my room, where I feel like I just kind of steam trained through the show and was just so anxious to talk about the what happens on each track that I don't stop to just let it marinate for a minute. So I need to remember to do that, especially after I've had a guest and another guest, and I haven't done one where I'm just talking. I gotta remember to just breathe. You should remember to breathe with me. Do we start shows with breathing exercises? No, I'm kidding. But let's get out of here. But before I go, my friends have suggested that I do a What Am I Listening To? And I did one a little while ago, and I talked about Mannequin Pussy, but I thought I'd do another recommended album that is on my contenders for 2024, and that is The Last Dinner Party. They're out of England, and I think it's 4 or 5 women. And it's very cinematic. I looked it up, and it's got the title of Baroque Pop. If it ain't broke, Baroque Pop. So there's chamber orchestra. There's it's cool. And I'm listening to that album, and it's called, what's the name of the album? I can't remember what it's called. I'm going to look it up right now. We have to, because I got to be able, The Last Dinner Party. And I've been enjoying that one a lot. And the album is called Prelude to Ecstasy. It just came out this year. And that's on there along with Mannequin Pussy, which I talked about a couple episodes ago. But I'm going to try to remember each episode that I do at least a solo one to talk about an album that I'm listening to and enjoying. And I think that's a cool one. Thanks for joining me once again for Waterproof Records. I'm so thankful to have you here with me. And I am now a part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. And I'm so excited about that. That is a new development and a new part of this show. I have joined them, and I'm thrilled because it will enable me to reach more people. And also it's going to give me an opportunity to play song clips in episodes. There's not much I can do about past episodes. But going forward, I can share with you little snippets of songs and moments, and I plan on doing that. So thrilled about being a part of Pantheon. So if you've ever checked out, they have a lot of great shows, and I'm just happy to be part of the team, and it'll be nice to have the support from them. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it will lead. It could open up a lot more opportunities for Waterproof Records down the road, maybe like I dreamed and talked about on episodes before, like a live show, a touring show. Let's make it happen. But thank you to you for sticking with me through all of this and seeing me grow all the way from those first few episodes where I was really finding my way through the dark to now I have such amazing guests, and I have so many more guests that I've been talking to that are interested in coming on the show, and I'm working on scheduling those. So thank you so much. Don't forget to check out distrokid.com/VIP/waterproof to get that 30% off your first year. And thanks as always for watching the show and listening to the show, I should say. Because most of you listen to the show and very few of you watch the show. All right. We'll see you next time on Waterproof Records. Bye.
Things are going to change. feel it.
If this gonna be that kind of party, I'm gonna